I am Matthew Durdy, Chief Business Officer of the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult. For those of you that don't know what the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult is, we're a UK-based institution, about 170 people, more than a little bit obsessed with technological innovation in this space and helping companies develop. We've got a couple of development facilities in the UK. One of them is a non-GMP process development facility, and the other is a GMP manufacturing systems development facility. That's pretty much the end of what I'm going to say about the Catapult itself. There are three legs to our philosophy in terms of the way we operate, and that is that there are three streams that have to be done together. That is the clinical development, and we've had a fantastic story this morning about Lux Turner. The second is the reimbursement development, and it's great to see that story on the stage in the plenary of this session. It wasn't 5 years ago. And then the third stage that the leg of this thing that we heard about was cost of goods, manufacturing, and all that. So that's our subject for the day. And one of the things that we operate by in the Catapult is that these things will need to be sorted out together. Some of these issues are very, very big. They're going to require cooperation. They're going to require some sort of change to the structure. So what we did last year is we sponsored an event that was initiated by Phacilitate to bring together a number of experts in the field of automation and manufacturing to discuss the subjects, to set the agenda for what's going forward. And so what we've been asked to do here is to report back on that. And I'm not going to do long introductions to the panelists. I'm going to give you their names, and they're going to do their own introductions as we go through the structure of the morning. But starting closest to me, we've got Jason Jones from Miltenyi, Rod Rietze from Novartis, and David Kneen from Invetech. So if I could start with Rod, you were high up on this. Can we have the slide up, please? Yep. Okay, great. Rod, you're going to lead us off. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization? You've got a fantastic job from my perspective. Tell us what that is, because I think some people find that quite exciting. And take us through the event and what came out of that.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Rod Rietze. I work at Novartis. My previous experience at Novartis Cell and Gene Therapy was to support the process automation for CART19, which became Kymriah. My new role is at the Novartis Institutes for Biomedical Research, our research arm. I support next generation CARTs by developing truly transformative analytics, process, and data management systems to change the space, lowering cost of goods, et cetera. I was very privileged to attend the special interest group in automation, and I gave the keynote address to a field of outstanding members. I think all of the entities that were there that contribute to the community of cell and gene and automation in this space were there. And quid pro quo, I've been asked to take the 40-page document that was assessed from 150 people in 2 days and distill it to a single slide. So let's see how I did. I've distilled it down to 5 points, and I think these should be obvious, but also act as catalysts and lightning rods for the field to understand where's the work to be done. So the first question that came up was, when do you invest in automation? How do you do this? And the response is that automation isn't a single event, it's actually a strategy. And you need to have your end product in mind and to think backwards from there, and how do I automate that? You should plan for success, and you should build your confidence around critical quality attributes, learning about your product itself. The most effective cost-saving measure at the beginning is to close your process. That reduces your clean room demands. It allows you to use controlled and non-classified spaces, and as I said, it will greatly reduce your cost of goods. The second point was understanding and developing next generation and new cell and vector processes, manufacturing processes, technologies, and devices. Once again, closing these closed devices that are flexible. I use the term responsive. It would be great for these devices to understand what has been given to them and how they respond. Anybody who's worked with aphereses understands that this is a very, very different starting material. We have patients that have different treating regimes, and you can have a great aphe and you can have a very terrible one. You need to manufacture that, and it would be great for the device to be able to handle that. Intelligent and connected systems, they're talking to one another, and you're squeezing all the data you can out of this. I use the word relevant. There are devices that are becoming obsolete as next generation processes are in place, so relevant, non-destructive, and inline analytics. Think of the food processing industry. They don't destroy their product, they monitor it, and they have a safe release from there, and they use inferential monitoring. The third point is a significantly better understanding of the product. I think that's fairly obvious. Recognizing and addressing the limitations of assaying a living product. This product changes. When you take a snapshot of your product, it's almost certain that the product has changed since that snapshot. What do you do with that information? Optimizing, and by optimization, they wanted to shorten or tailor the process. At present, we're dosing patients. What we'd like to do is to understand drug product. What is the active pharmaceutical ingredient or ingredients? And let's produce those and only those. Number 4 is data capture, management, use, and analysis. We're talking about the automated capture and analysis of analytics. We developed a system that allowed to have automatic gating, save thousands of hours, reduce the number of reagents we had. We need to leverage that data across the clinical spectrum, across the harvesting of the AIF, and have that data management system so that it's transparent and you leverage all the data you can. The idea of a universal control system for quality, manufacturing, logistics, let's have everyone benefit from that data. And my final point, accelerating the integration of novel technologies. We are developing new technologies as a field. The example that I put on there is the rapid microbial testing methodologies. At present, you can have a 14-day test for your release criteria. However, there are systems out there that will allow you to shorten that to an hour or hours. We've, as a field, have gone together and want to develop these into existing technologies and approach the FDA and other regulatory agencies to say, what will it take for us to have these integrations and raise the entire field and cut 14 days off a manufacturing process?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's quite an incredible summary in a very short period of time. One of my questions is you know, what's come out of this? So we've sat down, we've set an agenda. It's a big agenda. Slightly scary agenda. There's a lot to be done. It's not going to be done by any individual organization, and it's, you know, from an economics point of view, it's classically where these things fall over because people have to get together to work together on this. Can you guys point to any examples of where you're out collaborating with other organizations to try and move some of these agendas forward?
Well, for us, Matthew, I think this is confirmation for us. It was a fantastic event last March, and this is really confirmation of what is really a mission statement for us at Miltenyi Biotech as a technology tools provider and a manufacturing platform provider. We were very pleased and reassured to see that this is what the industry needs, and it's been a lot of work in the last few years, and it will be again to put this into operation. So we got confirmation.
We certainly approached and were approached by different size companies. We have been working with organizations that are 9-member biotech companies that have truly innovative technologies. I think by extending the arm, and not just Novartis, but our other pharmaceutical companies saying we have to do this as a field, we need to engender true innovation, and that comes from academics. It comes from very small organizations, as well as large organizations like Miltenyi, and you know, we are working with all the right players, we hope.
One of the areas that Rodney touched on is the data capture and the use of information. And that, to me, firstly, it's a fundamental benefit of automation that you can capture a huge amount of data about your process that you potentially were not able to capture or control previously. It's also an area where I think there is less contrast between the different solutions offered out there, and the ability to standardise in information capture and how we manage that across the industry, I think, is something we can really take advantage of. Excellent,
excellent. Okay, any questions, any points from the floor at all? Okay, so you've heard a couple of things there. There's an agenda there to work on. This is something that's going to be moving forwards, and I would encourage everybody to engage with it, because I do think it's an industry activity. It's an industry initiative as itself. So we picked out in our pre-discussions a couple of subjects that we were going to try and drill down on a bit and try and stimulate things a little bit more. And David's going to take forward the concept of you know, the event itself was about automation, but actually one of the things that comes out of the discussion is what is automation, when is automation, and David's going to introduce that. But first of all, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your company, and then introduce this concept for us?
Sure, thank you, and good morning to you all. My name is David Kneen. I'm the Vice President of Invetech's Cell and Advanced Therapies Group. For those that don't know Invetech, we're I guess a custom automation player focused on next generation biosciences. Cell and advanced therapy groups obviously focused on the commercial manufacturing of these therapies. We've been doing that for about 15 years now. We assist clients with the strategic thinking around commercialisation. We assist clients with the establishment of manufacturing, both integration of existing systems from various players in the market, as well as blank sheet of paper development. And of course, we also manufacture GMP equipment at our own facilities. We're about 300 specialist engineers with 3 facilities in San Diego, in Boxborough, and 1 in Melbourne, Australia. So I think the transition from the clinical to the commercial stages of manufacturing is clearly one of the key strategies that everyone here is thinking about, and one that I think the SIG reflected a couple of really interesting points on. I just wanted to touch base on 3 of those points. The first one that you've mentioned is that automation is not the holy grail. The second one is to keep our eye on the end game. And the third one is to understand some of the trade-offs that you're making as you go along that journey. So the holy grail question, it is interesting that the SIG was called the SIG for automation as opposed to the SIG for, say, effective manufacturing. But we are here to talk about cost-effective manufacturing in a commercial space. And it's really important to realise that automation is not the solution, it's a part of the solution. We all know that automation has great potential to improve product consistency, for example, by taking some of the art out of the process. We know it has the ability to reduce the number of operators involved, potentially both number and skill of operators involved, and therefore have a cost impact. And you mentioned, of course, the facilities impact in terms of being able to go to less footprint of lower classification spaces. But it's also perfectly reasonable to think about your process and understand that there are elements of your process where a manual intervention or an offline intervention makes perfect sense. 2 of the classic examples that we see with a lot of our clients are QC. There's very little in the way of integrated QC available at this point in time. And incubation. Long-term incubation doesn't need to be on expensive capital equipment. My second point was around keeping the end game in mind. And of course, this is a transition everyone goes through. But I see 2 subtly different mindsets in some of our clients. There's a push out of the development lab mindset, and there's a pull towards commercial mindset. And typically clients transition between those 2. What I mean is that the push companies that are out there work very hard in the development labs to accelerate progress into clinical trials, and often do so potentially without the long-term view. And that can mean using clinical techniques or methods that are not necessarily automatable. The companies that transition to a pull philosophy tend to be looking forward, saying, what is my commercial model? What's my end game? How many patients do I need to treat? Where are they going to be? And then looking back at their development process and understanding, how do I reorient my development process in order to meet that end game? The interesting thing that I think the SIG highlighted was there's a transition in mindset that the best companies make that happens at around the phase 2 point in their development process. So by the time you're approaching or in phase 2, typically want to be thinking about that end game. And I think we would all support that. And the third point I wanted to make was around understanding the trade-offs. And there's really 2 key trade-offs here. One is around flexibility. Obviously, the development lab, the benchtop, we've got extraordinary amounts of flexibility, but perhaps not the consistency or the efficiency that we would be looking for in a commercial manufacturing sense. When we get to the other end of the scale, you can have enormous cost efficiency, enormous efficiency in use of materials. But typically in a GMP process, we're trying to lock down any flexibility. And so there's this transition as you move along the spectrum towards commercial manufacture. That's a difficult transition to manage, has to be managed strategically. The second one is that technology is an investment, and that investment is not just dollars, it's effort as well. And so there is this trade-off between how much effort you spend in potentially developing other elements of your pipeline or progressing your clinical trials with manual production versus how much effort you're going to put into commercial production and preparation for that. And one of the things that a lot of folks are potentially upset by is that initially, when you're using automated manufacture, you may actually find it more expensive or more effort required in order to establish low volume manufacture, potentially for your phase 3 clinical trial. It's really important to understand those trade-offs and go into them sort of open-minded.
Interesting, thank you. So picking on your point, sort of starting with the end in mind, because that's it's been a sort of mantra of our organisation for a while. Does that open up the concept that there is an optimal automation-ready way of doing the early-stage science? Are there things that can be done in the early development that would make this process development a lot easier going down the line?
Yes.
It's an open question to all three of you to come in on that.
So certainly from my perspective, there are a number of benchtop techniques that will not translate well. And a lot of the automation that you see in this space is around trying to integrate, I guess, early modules for doing some of those unit operations into a process such that it is a more translatable process. And we see a lot of examples of that from many companies in the field right now.
We at Miltenyi make this a real concept that we've tried to be working on for a number of years now, the translation from academic science and into clinical manufacturing and then closer towards commercial manufacturing. And we try and do this a little bit with some of the raw materials, and we try and make those instantly translatable. So they're exactly the same media, growth factors, etc., that you're using in the research lab, that you just then step up to a different quality. And of course, taking some of the unit operations, self-selection, of course, from Miltenyi Biotec, but the expansions, etc., that we try and make as translatable as possible. Nonetheless, I think when you start working on a product that you want eventually to be clinical and commercial, I think the SIG highlighted it very heavily, that early adoption of some of those technologies that you're going to be using all the way to commercial manufacturing should be taken up as early as possible. And we try to facilitate that in terms of small scale that can scale out a bit later on, and in terms of those small R&D scale kind of experiments that you can translate very quickly. But we try, it's difficult. Some of the characteristics are difficult to translate, but we try and make that and facilitate that as much as possible. It's, I think, what we can do.
And I would agree. We make sure that our researchers have access and do use the devices that are readily available in the entire field. We make sure that we lower the bar. We use defined medias. We use standard techniques and standardized methods as much as possible. One thing that I'll call out that was very surprising to us is when we started using automated analytics. I've spoken about this FlowSpa platform that we have. And you don't realize it, but each researcher in your organization is like a separate entity. They're performing their own analytics, they're performing their own function. The variation between those two people in the lab is quite high. And when you start having a standardized analytical platform, you realize how high that variation is and how difficult it is to translate. Well, my results, I believe my results, your results aren't so good. And then you put them together and you say, well, actually, both of our results need some changing or some standardization. So things like that really benefit us a lot and then help the mindset of a research to a development organization.
Interesting, interesting. Slightly different tack, but on the same question of when, where, how, and automation. I remember sitting with some colleagues in a sister organization who specialize in automation, but in the car and heavy industries. And they turned around and said to me, you would never do automation to reduce cost of goods, which was kind of totally counterintuitive to me when that was said. But then they went on to explain, because actually you've already got a process and you're going to invest a huge amount of money in a process that you've already got running. You only do it to expand your business in some way, shape or form, to make something bigger and better. I mean, is that the way you approach the automation? Then Rod, you're in the middle of an organization.
Not at all. It isn't just, it's a horse for a course. Yes, you're right. Automation in general can be expensive and it can raise your cost of goods. When we were developing and incurring automation platforms, we were forced by our business unit to say that there had to be return on investment. We had to demonstrate net present value, and we had to show that any automation that we were going to include would lower the cost of goods. So that was the bar, and it was a very good bar, actually, because we had to rethink our relationship with the different companies. We were very transparent with the companies and told them this is what we needed to do. And they too had structures that were in place that were helpful, and it helps this life cycle. So, you know, I would agree on some, I'm not going to develop $1 million device that's a nice volume reduction or a wash device. No, that's going to be too expensive. But certainly, I need to keep cost of goods in mind, and why have a $1 million device that I have to add 7 or 8 other $1 million devices and making it expensive manufacturing.
David, you were nodding when I said David.
No, I mean, this is absolutely true. The idea that we can commercially establish manufacture through automation is a bit simplistic. The idea is that we can commercially establish manufacture, full stop. Automation is a means to that end, and if the business case isn't there, it just doesn't make sense. For example, if you're producing a therapy for an ultra-rare disease, it may not make sense unless there is an off-the-shelf tool that just does the job. If you're doing something that's for an enormous patient population, then in that case, a much more dedicated, potentially less flexible manufacturing solution is more likely to be the right answer.
Okay. Any questions from the floor before I move on to? Okay. All right. So no, I'm conscious of time. I wouldn't like to fail on my primary task. Although I have been given an extra 5 minutes here, so that's good. So we then had a discussion about, really this concept of platforms and off the shelf, and really how does this fit into the whole ecosystem? Is it incremental benefits, the sort of sky cycling type model, or can you buy into automation in a big way? And Jason's going to really lead off on that and talk to us about it. But first of all, tell us about yourself and the organization that you come from.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jason Jones. I'm the Commercial Cell and Gene Therapy Manager for Miltenyi Biotec in and around the UK. And Miltenyi Biotec, I think a lot of you know us. And Stefan himself very passionately explained what we're doing and how we are now 20 years experience in the clinic with cell and gene therapy manufacturing. And we're very proud of that. I was given the task of talking about a manufacturing platform. And I think this is very much what we're trying to put together for the industry at Miltenyi Biotec. And it's not just us, other manufacturing platforms are available. But I think as a field of technology providers, we're trying to give something that already addresses some of what are becoming market standard processes now. And I think if what we're doing and we're building around our own devices and raw materials, if we have a kind of a system, a platform that we can uplift and bring to you and put into your own facility so that you can take as read some of that development. You'll still have to do your own validations and simulate your own nuances of your product and your process within it. But if we can take some of that development away, actually I very much think we can reduce costs of goods for a product development if we can reduce product development time, and if we can produce the amount of work that has to go into each and every little module of processing, and I think we can. You might think, okay, so what is a manufacturing platform? Is it integrated? Yes. Is it automated? Yes. Is it closed system? Yes. I think this was all taken as read after the SIG, and we're certainly working along those lines. I think it's fairly revolutionary, actually, to be able to make different products in parallel in the same facility in lower grade backgrounds, and we've very much taken that as a task for ourselves. But taking this platform and applying it to all the different products that you're all developing out there with all your different characteristics is a challenge, but I think we have a good backbone that we can offer. And I think that this is the task for all of us technology providers, to give you something that that you can assimilate to your own requirements. So what is a good manufacturing platform? I'm going to narrow it down to two main points. Well, I could talk about this all day. But flexibility. Now, we talked about this early on. It's a little counterintuitive, actually. This is a GMP manufacturing framework that we're offering. GMP manufacturing, of course, by its nature is very rigid and very staid, but a manufacturing platform to be supplied to the market has to be flexible. As I mentioned, all of your products are different. You all have different steps that you need to implement, whether it be different cell types or different expansion conditions or so on and so forth. So we have to be able to incorporate that. The right platform must be flexible to begin with, and then maybe you will need to return to that rigidity a bit later on. And we certainly look at what we're doing to fit into that scheme. The other thing is, we talked around a word of obsolescence. I think that if you're going to invest in a manufacturing platform, again, it has to be the right platform in terms of how far this is going to take you. You don't want to invest in multiple manufacturing platforms. And so I think adaptability is a very key feature of a manufacturing framework to be offered. Already at the moment, we have new technology leaps that are out there, whether you have to, okay, you can take as read a CAR-T process, but potentially you want to add in some more specific gene modification with CRISPR-Cas9 or TALENs, for example. Well, okay, so already we have to make that platform amenable to electroporation and other transfection methods. And there's other process elements that are on the horizon that we can already see. but also there's things around the corner that we just can't see at this moment in time. And so a little bit of crystal ball gazing, but we have to make our platform adaptable so that you can carry on with that through your whole product development and your company's development. So adaptability, flexibility, but if you have those things in place, then I firmly believe that taking a kind of a plug and play as much as you can of market standard processes off the shelf into your own setting can really give you a reduction in cost of goods and time of development.
Very interesting. I just want to pick on that concept of obsolescence, because I think in this industry where you've seen products, as we heard earlier on, and coming to the market incredibly quickly, and everybody's talking about second generation, third generation, fourth generation, if you're building platforms, you can't presumably build a platform for an individual therapeutic. I mean, how do you go? I mean, you've talked about building that flexibility, but I'm interested to know from the other two how your clients or your colleagues approach that from the point of view of the investment.
Do you want to go first? So from our point of view, you have to begin with the end, and you have to think, how large is my patient population? If I have a very small patient population, I have to be very conscious of my cost of goods. I have to be very conscious that my manufacturing may be limited, and automation may not be the way to go. If I have a very large patient population and I have a large footprint, and I want to have this population in Europe, in the United States, around the world, now it transforms your thinking. It also is the process itself. A manufacturing process doesn't stand alone. It's supported by quality. It's supported by regulatory. It really is a community, as is automation. If you just think in a box and do not think about how this is going to be impacted and do not have input from quality, from regulatory, from senior leadership, from operations, we have these plans to make a 100,000 square foot facility. I'm not interested in automation because I've just got 400 people working for me. You're telling me? So it's this really this dynamic and this ecosystem. How we proceed forward is based on the end. If we have a very simple product, as we understand our product more, we may not need as many steps as is in the current manufacturing process, and we gladly obsolete that process. The comparability demands, if I have a device that allows us to no longer, I can pick for the cells that I want to select and I want to expand. Well, I'm no longer making 20 billion cells, now I'm making 1 million cells. Well, I can't take an old manufacturing process and use that. So it's really a long story short, it's an ecosystem. It's understanding where you want to shoot to, how you're going to get there, and what your company and your patient platform will allow.
Okay. David.
So I think you've actually covered that really, really well. It is definitely horses for courses. There are situations where a dedicated manufacturing system for a single therapy makes sense. They're pretty rare at this point in time. More likely, if you have a platform therapy with a number of indications where there's a relatively minor deviation between those therapies, then the commercial scale automation is going to have sufficient flexibility to manage that, but still be highly efficient to drive cost of goods. But as you get down to the rarer indications, to things where you're less sure about, it makes perfect sense to use the off-the-shelf equipment, to use manual processes where necessary.
Okay. Conscious of time. 10 seconds each for a last question. What do you think or hope will be the big developments in the next year or so in your space? Jason.
For me, it's really what's happening now. I think the challenge of scale, I think for a lot of companies is what's taking a lot of time and their resources, and will do for a number of years yet, as we work towards greater markets with bigger indications. I think integration as well. You mentioned it with data handling, but I'd add in their logistics and supply chain, and that's going to be a challenge. I think also QP,
you had 10 seconds.
QP release of multiple products and so on and so forth. So there is a long list. There's a long list.
Transformative analytics and data management systems.
Right. Okay. David.
Yeah, look, automation relies on feedback control. At the moment, we can feedback control based on temperature, based on pressure, based on time. They're physical variables that we hope translate to something in our products. At this point in time, there is not much in the way of good integrated analytics to really understand what's going on at the cell level. I would love to see that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, in very brief summary, huge amounts of work to do. Data analytics obviously coming out as a strong theme there towards the end. Start with the end in mind. And we all need to work together on this, so there are opportunities to come together in collaboration, working through the next SIG as it comes forward. My task from the organisers is to remind you that the coffee is available outside. Not that I was slightly obsessed by this, but and then to remind you to be at the next sessions in your chosen rooms by 11:30. But to finish off, would you please join me in thanking the speakers for their efforts today.